Dusk turned the desert the color of dry blood. The forward operating base crouched in its shallow bowl of earth and concrete. A cluster of low buildings, HESCO walls, and antenna masts silhouetted against a fading orange sky. For a moment, it was almost quiet, just the low thrum of generators and the tinny music leaking from someone's barracks window. Then the first mortar hit. It landed on the far side of the base with a flat, concussive whomp, a blossom of fire and dust punching upward. A half-second later came the sound, a rolling crack that slammed into chests and rattled teeth. The sirens that followed sounded thin and late. Incoming! 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 Alarms wailed. Men and women scrambled out of doorways and across gravel toward bunkers and fighting positions. Somewhere, a metal tray crashed to the floor. A basketball rolled across the cracked concrete court, abandoned. A second mortar landed closer, slamming into the empty basketball court itself. The blast threw up a sheet of flame as the shock wave torched a nearby fuel bladder, a rolling cylinder of rubber and diesel. Fire erupted in a gust, hurling a wall of black smoke toward the main gate and motor pool. In the motor pool, Specialist Reyes flattened himself against the wheel well of a maintenance truck as shrapnel whickered over his head and pinged off metal. "Where the hell did that come from?" he shouted, voice high and thin, even though nobody was close enough to hear. Over the net, he screamed into his radio. "Thunder, this is Echo 2. We've got accurate indirect on the motor pool. Requesting." Static tore through his words. He pulled the radio from his vest, staring at it, as if he could will it to work. "Thunder, say again. Bat, do you copy?" His voice climbed. "Anybody on this freaking net?" More static. Nothing else. Mortars started walking in, one after another, each a little closer to the heart of the base. The command building with its sandbagged entryway, the squat concrete bunker that held the operations room, the windowless container at the back with the air conditioning unit humming over a bank of humming electronics. Inside the command post, maps and monitors shook as the blast drew nearer. Dust drifted down from the ceiling. First Lieutenant Kincaid pressed his headset closer to his ear, staring at the radio console like he could physically push a signal through. "I don't care if the satellites are down," he barked at the radio man. "Give me battalion on something." "We've lost the sat link, sir," the radio man said, fingers flying over dials that didn't seem to matter. "I can get local, short range." "That's it. Then use local." Kincaid grabbed a hand mic. "All call signs, this is Thunder Actual. Get under hard cover, maintain sectors, report casualties and ammo." The floor bucked. Another mortar slammed into the gravel just outside, close enough to shatter one of the narrow windows and shower glass across the ops table. "Status when able," he finished, forcing the words out. Through a small reinforced window, he could see the pattern. The rounds weren't random. They were walking in, adjusting with unnerving precision from the outer perimeter straight toward the command building and that container at the rear. "They've got our range," he muttered. "Son of a, they've rehearsed this." He crossed to another window that looked toward the motor pool. Through the rising smoke, he could make out the shapes of vehicles, a tangled scatter of trucks, armored transports, and maintenance shelters. And in the open between them, he saw soldiers pinned flat, hugging whatever cover they could find. A heavy machine gun opened up from the high ground, chattering long, angry bursts downhill. Tracer rounds stitched across the yard like a red zipper, smashing into walls and skipping sparks from truck frames. Down there, a young private, maybe Reyes, maybe someone else, dragged himself behind a stack of tires, one leg slick with blood. The machine gun's tracer line jerked to follow, walking straight toward him. "Come on, move," Kincaid whispered, knowing the guy probably couldn't hear anything except his own breath. The gunner adjusted again. The next burst was going to cut the soldier in half. A sound cut through the roar. It wasn't louder than the machine gun or the mortar blasts. It was cleaner. A single, crisp crack that didn't match the weapons the defenders were using. A sound with space around it. The machine gun's burst chopped off midstream. The tracer line jerked up suddenly, then froze, then disappeared as the gunner toppled backward out of the nest, a dark shape tumbling against the sky. The heavy weapon sagged on its mount, silent. For a heartbeat, Everything in Kincaid's field of view seemed to pause. The wounded soldier gasping on his back, the dust hanging in the air, the flicker of firelight strobed by explosions. "Nice shot, Tower 2, someone said over local comms. "Keep." "Negative," Tower 2 replied, breathless. "That wasn't us. Scope's useless, sir, we're blinded. Smoke and dust. I don't even have eyes on the ridgeline." Another explosion rolled through the compound, this one farther away. Somewhere to the left, behind the smoke screen swallowing the main gate, a rocket-propelled grenade shrieked in and detonated against the outer wall, spraying concrete. At the edge of the motor pool, behind the wreckage of a burning truck, two defenders huddled with their rifles, trying to find targets in the murk. "You see that?" one shouted. "MG on the hill is down." "Lucky hit from somewhere," the other yelled back. "Just shoot at anything not wearing our pattern." On the far side of the base, an enemy RPG crew hustled forward behind the cover of their own smoke, crouched low, moving toward a better firing position that overlooked the server container's blast door. No one on the ground saw them. Their bodies were just smudges behind denser smudges, lost in the turbulent haze. Somewhere above and behind the base, farther up the slope with a high ground curled around in a shallow crescent, a lone figure lay prone on a jagged shelf of rock. Her rifle lay still against her shoulder, barrel poking over the edge of the outcrop. The optic on top was spider-cracked, half useless. She didn't seem to care. She exhaled slowly, the rest of the world shrinking down to a blurred oval of space and a moving silhouette in its center. The enemy RPG gunner paused, lifted his launcher, and started to settle into a firing stance. The rifle spoke again. Down below, the gunner jerked a small, almost delicate movement and collapsed sideways. The launcher clattered out of his hands. His assistant froze, then scrambled backward, dragging the body as another round, fractionally faster this time, smacked into the rocks inches from his face. Over the net, the voices rose. "Who the hell is on the glass?" someone demanded. "Tower 1, that you?" "Negative. Tower 1. We can't see Jack. Everything's smoke. Overwatch, report." Kincaid barked into the mic, eyes scanning the parapets. "Who's firing those precision shots?" "Thunder Actual, this is Tower 2. The tower guard's voice was shaky but honest. "We got no line of sight upslope. We're blind." "That's not us, sir." Another mortar landed, this one just beyond the intel container, showering it with dirt. The blast door held. For now. Kincaid turned back to the narrow strip of ridgeline he could see between the buildings, squinting past the distortion of rising heat and smoke. Once, just once in the gap between bursts and explosions, he caught a glimpse. High above the base, on a rock shelf that looked barely big enough for a human body, someone lay flat, their outline almost indistinguishable from a stone. Their barrel twitched upward a fraction, then stopped. Their free hand adjusted the cracked scope, nudging it like they'd done this 1,000 times. Rounds snapped and hissed around the outcrop, kicking chips of stone from the edge. The figure didn't so much as flinch. They breathed, slow and steady, and the rifle bucked gently into their shoulder again. Another explosion. Another enemy weapon gone silent. "Kincaid, where are those shots coming from?" the base sergeant shouted from the doorway, ducking as a stray round smacked into the wall nearby. Kincaid ignored him, leaning closer to the glass as if it might give him a better view. He had the strangest sensation that whoever that was up there had been here before, had studied this place, knew exactly how the terrain wrapped around the base and how the angles played out. But he personally signed off on the guard rotations. There was no sniper slated for that position. There wasn't even supposed to be a position there. Thunder Actual to all stations. He stabbed the transmit button again, voice rough. "Someone tell me who is saving our asses from that ridgeline." Silence. Then just the usual noise. Breathing, shouted orders, distant gunfire. No answer. The figure on the rock shelf worked the bolt of the rifle with smooth, practiced motion, chambering yet another round as enemy tracer fire arced blindly over their position. "Fine," Kincaid muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "If I have to, I'll go up there and thank them personally later." He didn't know, yet, That the person keeping his base from turning into a casualty report hadn't even been on the manifest that morning. He didn't know she was a visitor. He didn't know that 12 hours ago, she'd stepped off a truck in jeans and dusty sneakers, intending to do nothing more dangerous than have dinner with her younger brother and maybe pretend, for one day, that she wasn't the person she'd spent years trying to forget. The story would go back to that morning, to heat instead of fire, to boredom instead of terror, to small details everyone else missed. And only then would it explain how a quiet woman, who wasn't supposed to be there at all, became the only thing standing between this outpost and names etched into marble. The sun had been cruel that morning. It flattened color, bleached the horizon, and baked the gravel into something that felt like walking on a skillet. Heat shimmered above the concrete barriers and parked vehicles, making distant ridges look like they were floating. The forward operating base looked smaller in daylight, almost unimpressive. A handful of squat buildings, stacked shipping containers, and HESCO towers ringed in concertina wire. At the gate, a faded sign rattled in the breeze, the paint peeling around the unit crest. A dusty flatbed truck rolled up in a cough of exhaust. A guard waved it through after a perfunctory check. It rumbled across the washboard gravel and squealed to a stop near the transient tent. The rear flap clattered down. A few supply crates, a couple of duffel bags, and one person climbed off. Raya hit the ground with the easy, loose-kneed step of someone whose body had spent years carrying weight over worse terrain. She wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, a faded cotton shirt, a lightweight jacket tied around her waist. Nothing about her looked particularly threatening or important. Her eyes told a different story. Even as she shrugged the strap of her small backpack higher, her gaze traveled from the entry control point to the nearest tower, from the tower to the ridgeline beyond, from the ridgeline to the gently sloping ground between here and there. She noted distances without consciously thinking about them. How many seconds to sprint from tent to bunker? How much dead space existed under the tower's field of view, with a high ground curved around like a cupped hand? Nobody else around her looked up. A couple of soldiers smoked in the shade of a vehicle. A forklift beeped as it backed up, loaded with pallets. Somewhere nearby, a basketball thumped out a rhythm against cracked pavement. Raya, the shout came from behind the truck. A young man in an undersized plate carrier and dust-stained uniform jogged up, helmet unbuckled, sunglasses askew. His name tape read Hawthorne, but the tired grin on his face made him look more like a kid than a corporal. "You're late," she said mildly, shifting her bag. "Is this the 5-star reception I was promised?" He puffed, pretending outrage. "Hey, in my defense, Supply Sergeant decided today was the day we reorganized the Konix, because that totally can't wait an hour while I go collect my very important visitor." She raised an eyebrow. Reorganize? Or hide the good coffee from the rest of the company? He winced. Okay, there may have been some side quests, but still, traffic was murder. He gestured grandly at the empty stretch of gravel road. Raya let herself smile, small but genuine. "Nice to see you too, Tom." They hugged, brief and slightly awkward around his gear. He smelled like dust and sweat and laundry detergent that had never quite rinsed out right. "You look good," he said, stepping back to study her. "You look not deployed. That's a thing, right?" "Retired," she corrected. "Or trying to be. Yeah." He grabbed her backpack and slung it over his own shoulder before she could protest. How civilian life. She thought of the tiny apartment above a laundromat, the job she'd quit after 3 months because the open plan office made her feel like she was on an observation deck. The way sirens in the night still made her reach for weapons that weren't there. "Loud," she said after a beat. "And boring. Both at once. It's weird." "You came to the wrong place to fix the boring part," he said, leading her toward the main cluster of buildings. "Nothing ever happens here. It's a relay node with extra steps." They passed the basketball court, where a couple of off-duty soldiers played a lazy game of HORSC, their uniforms unbuttoned, sleeves rolled. Music drifted from a speaker balanced on a cinder block. Near the motor pool, a mechanic lay half under a truck, legs sticking out as he wrestled with a stubborn bolt. "Seriously," Tom went on, "we route convoys, we move fuel, we stare at spreadsheets. It's basically purgatory with better chow. Still a long way from home, Raya said, watching a squad file pass them toward the gate, weapons at the low ready even in the heat. Logistics is how you win and lose quietly. He snorted. You sound like the briefings. Maybe they stole my lines. They reached the chow hall, a long, prefabricated building with an awning out front and a hand-painted sign promising hot food, mostly edible. Inside, the air was blessedly cooler, smelling of coffee, starch, and powdered eggs. Tom's squad occupied a corner table, already halfway through their meals. They looked up as he approached. Yo, this is my sister, Tom announced, dropping her bag by the wall. She's visiting for a couple of days, so everyone be on your best behavior. A chorus of greetings. Nods. Curious glances. Ma'am, one private said, starting to stand until Raya waved him down. No, ma'am, she said. Just Raya. I left the rank at the door. You had rank? Another soldier asked, eyes bright with curiosity. Tom said you used to, do some stuff with a rifle. Like, were you in recon, or... Tom cut in quickly. She did some time with a designated marksmanship team. That's all. Spends more time behind a laptop than a rifle now. Raya's mouth ticked at one corner, but she said nothing. In her head, a different image played. The dark interior of a hide site, the smell of sweat, mud, and old canvas. The world narrowed to the circle of her scope, a crowded street below, a moving figure, a voice in her ear counting down. 10 seconds. 8. 6. The sudden certainty that she didn't have the full picture, that something vital was missing, that her decision would echo for years. The shot, the target dropping, and then the screaming. Her hands had shaken for hours afterward. They disguised it as adrenaline. She knew better. She pushed the memory away, focusing instead on the present. Plastic trays, clattering cutlery, Tom shoving a carton of chocolate milk toward her like it was an offering. A young lieutenant stopped by their table on his way out, tray in hand. His sleeves were rolled, just so, his posture straight enough to advertise fresh training. Hawthorne, he nodded. This your family? Yes, sir, Tom said, snapping automatically to attention before relaxing slightly. Raya, this is Lieutenant Kincaid. Sir, this is my sister. Kincaid offered a polite smile, extending a hand. Good to have you here. Always nice when people get to see where their siblings are wasting their talents. Wasting? Tom protested. Sir, you wound me. You wound my inbox, Kincaid countered. Enjoy your visit, Raya. Chow's not much, but it beats MREs. Raya shook his hand, noting the faint shadows under his eyes, the ink smudge on his thumb from too many map markings. Thanks, Lieutenant, she said. Place looks quiet. That's the idea, he said. We keep the boring parts of the war running. All the glamorous stuff happens somewhere else. The base sergeant passed a moment later, giving Raya a nod that was respectful but distant. To him, she was just another family visitor, something to be accounted for, but not part of the equation. Nobody asked why her gaze kept drifting to the windows. Nobody followed the way she mentally mapped the approach avenues, the dead ground, the overlapping arcs from the towers. Nobody except Tom noticed how often she scanned a ridgeline. Later, after lunch, they took their coffee outside. There was a makeshift patio of sorts at the back of the chow hall, just a handful of plastic chairs and a cigarette but it had a clear view across the bowl of the base toward the hills. Still doing that thing, Tom said quietly, following her gaze. What thing? Counting angles. You always did that when we were kids. In the grocery store. At the mall. You find the exit routes, the blind spots. Force of habit, she said. Hard to turn off. The ridgeline across from them wasn't dramatic. Just a gentle rise, dotted with scrub and rocks, wrapping around the far side of the base in a lazy arc. To most eyes, it was just terrain. To her, it was a balcony. Her gaze caught on something else. A faint pair of tracks leading up from the rear service road, cutting a diagonal path up the slope. Fresh. The edges hadn't been softened by wind or dust. Who's been joyriding up there? She asked, nodding toward the tracks. Tom squinted. Could be maintenance checking the comms relay tower. Or some bored jackass in a pickup. Not a secure area, really. We just have a keep out sign and hope for the best. Beyond the tracks, farther along the ridge, a spindly metal shape poked above the horizon. She hadn't seen it the last time she'd been on a base like this. "New cell towers?" she asked. "Local telecom got a contract," Tom said. "Supposed to improve connectivity for everyone in the valley. Host Nation project." He shrugged. "We use some of them for redundancy." "Convenient," Raya murmured. Near the inner perimeter, a civilian tanker truck sat parked closer to the wire than she liked, its cab empty. Laundry flapped on lines nearby. Life had to happen somewhere. They walked for a while after coffee, Tom dragging her on the unofficial tour, gym, laundry, aid station, motor pool. The air around the big bermed fuel bladders smelled permanently of diesel. Mechanics cursed at uncooperative engines. As they passed a flat-roofed building, Raya's gaze snagged on a lonely metal mast mounted atop it, a portable jammer antenna, its dish angled upward. "That thing work?" she asked, nodding at it. Tom glanced up. "In theory. Hire sent it with some new kit. But we never got the proper authorization codes to turn it on. Some frequency deconfliction issue with local infrastructure," they said. He snorted. "Basically, paperwork." "So, it just sits there," she said. "Yup. Like a fire extinguisher you're not allowed to use." He laughed. "You should put that in the suggestion box." They crossed near the row of containers at the rear. One of them was different. No windows. Double thick insulation. An air conditioning unit buzzed tirelessly on the side, even though the others were content with passive ventilation. Two MPs loitered near the door, rifles slung, eyes scanning half-heartedly. "That one's new," Raya said. Tom shifted his jaw. "Yeah, we, got some new server capacity. Bandwidth stuff. Data logs. Nerd magic. Above my pay grade. Gets its own guards, though," she said. He shrugged, a fraction too quickly. "Standard for anything with expensive electronics. Command doesn't want some idiot spilling coffee in there." She stored the information away. She'd seen that kind of container before. They were rarely just bandwidth. As afternoon melted toward evening, a convoy assembled near the motor pool. Armored vehicles lined up in a staggered column, dust already coating their paint. Soldiers checked straps, tied down loads, climbed into hatches. "Where are they going?" Raya asked. "Main hub down the highway," Tom said. "Routine resupply. They'll be back tomorrow. Or the next day if the roads suck. Or never if they decide we complain too much and cut us off, but that's above my stress level." She scanned the departing vehicles. One of the few gun trucks with a heavy weapon, a mortar carrier, several cargo haulers. The base always felt smaller when the big toys left. "So you're more isolated tonight," she said. "Yeah, but seriously," he insisted, bumping her shoulder with his. "Nothing ever happens here. Probably the most dangerous thing that'll happen is you regretting the chili at dinner." Later, after the sun dropped and the heat leached out of the air, they climbed the catwalk that ran along part of the inner wall. From up there, the bowl of the base spread beneath them. Motor pool, barracks, chow hall, shadows deepening between them. The ridgeline loomed darker now, the sky behind it fading from purple to deep blue. Sparse stars began to prick through. Raya leaned against the railing, fingers curling around warm metal. Her eyes traced the slope again, from the service road, weaving up its flank to the patch of rock that stuck out like a chipped tooth. She imagined lying there, prone, rifle settled on a bipod. "You still miss it?" Tom asked quietly, standing beside her, arms folded. She didn't have to ask what it meant. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not the hours. Not the smell. Not the debriefs where everyone pretends they're fine. I miss feeling like the world narrows down to one problem I can actually solve." "Thought you said you were done with this sniper thing," he said, nudging her with his elbow. "That it was bad for your posture." "It is," she said. "So why'd you quit, really?" The question hung between them. The breeze tugged at a loose strand of her hair. Somewhere in the distance, a generator coughed. She saw again the face in her scope, not as much older than Tom, crossing a street at just the wrong moment. The way her finger had strained against the trigger, the last fraction of hesitation, the casualty list afterward. She forced the image back into the box she'd built for it. "I got tired," she said, which was true but not complete. of being the one who makes a decision from 300 meters away and never gets to explain why. Tom studied her profile, saw the shadow that crossed her eyes, and didn't push further. He looked up at the stars instead. They look closer out here, he said. They're the same, she replied. We're just further from everything else. He laughed softly. So poetic. Maybe you did hang around too many officers. She snorted. Don't insult me. They stood there in companionable silence for a while, watching the lights blink on in the barracks, listening to the muted sound of bass winding down, distant laughter, a door slamming, boots on gravel. From up here, the base looked almost peaceful, self-contained, safe. Raya's gaze drifted one last time toward the outcrop on the ridge. She pictured, briefly, how you'd get there from inside the wire, where you'd have to cross, how exposed you'd be. Then she forced herself to look away. She wasn't here to work. She was here to be a sister. Tomorrow, she told herself, she'd be gone again. Back to the half-life she'd built. Back to loud, boring, confusing civilian streets where no one expected her to breathe, count, squeeze. Nothing ever happened here, Tom had said. She watched the stars harden into points of cold light and wondered why she didn't quite believe him. Dusk hadn't fully settled when the first tremor reached her. She and Tom were walking back from the gym, a thin sheen of sweat drying on their skin, gym shorts and t-shirts under their unfastened uniform tops. The air had cooled enough to feel almost pleasant. From somewhere beyond the ridgeline came a faint rumble, like distant thunder in a clear sky. Raya stopped mid-step. Tom glanced at her. What? She tilted her head slightly, listening. The next blast came a second later, closer this time, the sound lagging the impact by a heartbeat. That's not thunder, she said. The third impact hit the far side of the base. The world snapped into 3 pieces. The flash of light as the round struck, the blast that shoved hot air down the corridor between buildings, and the sound, an abrupt, teeth-rattling crack that rolled over them and echoed off the walls. Incoming, someone screamed. Incoming! Incoming! Sirens howled, their rising wail cutting through shouted voices. Floodlights snapped on around the perimeter, white beams lancing into smoke that hadn't formed yet. Let's go, Tom said, grabbing her arm and hauling her toward the nearest hardened shelter. The second mortar slammed into the basketball court as they sprinted past. The hoop disintegrated in a rain of metal and fiberglass. The round hit close enough that Raya felt the shock wave in her sternum, a shove that nearly took her feet out from under her. She saw the fuel bladder go up, saw it in the ragged corner of her vision, a gout of orange and black surging skyward like an inverted waterfall. Fire rolled across the ground, heat washing over them as they dove behind a low concrete wall. Smoke followed, thick and greasy, pushed by the evening breeze directly toward the main gate and motor pool. In seconds, that end of the base was half obscured behind a curtain of flames and soot. Sirens overlapped with shouted orders now. Boots pounded on gravel as soldiers sprinted from barracks and tents to their assigned fighting positions, some still buckling armor, some helmetless. Tom shoved Raya against the wall of a hardened maintenance bay. Stay here, he said, voice low but urgent. I gotta get my guys to cover. Tom. He grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against a nearby crate, slinging his plate carrier fully onto his shoulders in one practice motion. I'm serious, Raya. Get to a bunker and stay there. I'll come grab you once we've got accountability. Another mortar landed, closer to the center of the base this time. Shrapnel clanged off nearby equipment. You think I'm going to sit in a bunker while my... Please. The word cut through hers. For an instant, his eyes weren't joking or dismissive. They were scared. Just this once, do what the sign says, okay. He took off at a low run before she could answer, disappearing around the corner toward the motor pool. Raya pressed her back against the concrete, feeling the vibration of another impact through her spine. Her brain started doing the thing it always did, whether she wanted it to or not, building a map. Where the rounds had landed, the pattern of their distances, the rate of fire, the shift after each adjustment. These weren't wild, harassing shots. Someone up there had a clear grid on the base, and they were working methodically inward. Operations. A voice crackled on a nearby radio left on a crate. It was Kincaid. She recognized the cadence. All call signs, report status and casualties, over. Static washed over his words. A couple of fractured syllables came through, chopped and smeared like something torn on barbed wire. Say again, Kincaid barked. You're unreadable. Raya glanced at the radio. The little signal strength icons at the top of its display flickered and dropped, then flickered again. Her ears popped faintly, like the pressure in the air was subtly wrong. She'd felt this before, too. Not here. On another ridge, different field of fire. Someone in the valley had turned on a jammer. She snatched the radio off the crate and keyed the mic. Thunder Actual, this is... She hesitated, realizing she wasn't on any roster. This is Visitor with your supply corporal. You got active jamming, over. Static hissed back at her, unbroken. The local net resisted her voice like a wall of water. She dropped the radio back onto the crate, heart rate spiking now for reasons that had nothing to do with the mortars. Enemy technicals burst out of the smoke at the main gate. She couldn't see them directly from her position, but she saw the signature. Headlights cutting weird angles through gray, the silhouette of a pickup with a mounted gun on the back, the staccato flicker of muzzle flashes firing into the compound. An alarm at the gate cut off abruptly, replaced by the heavier, angrier roar of multiple weapons. Defenders returned fire from sandbag positions, but every time one of them leaned too far out, their body jerked backward as rounds snapped in. From the ridge, the machine gun she'd identified earlier opened up again, walking fire across anything that moved in the open. Smaller flashes hinted at least one marksman working alongside it, picking off anyone who dared a longer sprint. The bowl she'd studied earlier had become something else. A controlled, deliberate kill zone. Raya moved. Staying pinned to this wall meant waiting her turn to be fragged. She cut across a narrow alley between shipping containers, staying low, letting her feet remember the feel of running on gravel, the way to place each step so it made less noise. She ducked into a barracks, grabbing at lockers until she found an unsecured body armor carrier, the name tape belonging to someone likely already in gear. Sorry, she muttered to the empty room, shoving her arms through straps. One shoulder, still remembering exactly how much the weight should feel like. Out in the yard again, she kept to shadows and the lee of buildings, not running straight lines, never silhouetting herself against open sky. Static and clipped words sputtered from radios everywhere. Frustrated curses, names, numbers. Near the motor pool, chaos reigned. Trucks stood half-parked, some with doors flung open. A Humvee burned near the entrance, flames licking at its tires. Smoke obscured half the open space, drifting in thick walls that turned the world into a maze of grainy corridors. Tom's squad had been caught out there. She saw it in fragments, a soldier dragging another by his vest straps toward cover, leaving a dark smear on the ground. Two more pressed behind an engine block, one firing its silhouettes in the smoke, the other trying to staunch blood pumping between their fingers. Tom was there, his uniform now darker on one side where he'd thrown himself over his wounded friend. He had his rifle up, eyes furious and focused, but he couldn't move far. Any attempt to break from their current cover would expose the man under him to the machine gun on the ridge. Friendly movement was being strangled. Every 10 yards of open ground irradiated by overlapping fields of fire. The base was fragmenting into pockets, each one blind to the others. A rocket streaked out of the smoke and slammed into the outer wall near the intel container, showering it with debris. The blast door held again, but fissures spidered in the concrete nearby. Internal locking engaged, a voice crackled over a nearby hand mic. We're sealing the intel node. They're heading straight for it. So it wasn't just bandwidth. Raya ducked behind the hood of a truck, wiping grime from her face. She risked a quick peek toward the hills beyond the wire. Through a gap in the smoke, she saw what she'd suspected, a boxy truck parked on a small rise beyond the normal perimeter, ugly with antenna masts and a dish humming faintly. A couple of figures clustered around it, one with a headset, one watching the bays through binoculars. The jammer, she thought, and its brains. Along the service road she'd noticed earlier, shapes moved. More men, lower and more cautious, using what little cover there was as they angled along the slope, heading for high ground above the base. The fresh tracks from that morning had been recon, not random joyrides. Another mortar hit. This one landed dangerously close to the aid station, blasting the sandbags off its walls, cracking a window. The next fell closer to the command building. They were bracketing in on the things that mattered most. She ticked off the constraints in her head like a bitter checklist. Comms to higher, jammed. Satellite link dead. Visibility, collapsing around the main gate and motor pool under smoke and fire. Mortars, zeroed in with terrifying precision, likely controlled by that observer near the jammer. Friendly movement, pinned, chopped into defensible but isolated islands with no central coordination. Reinforcements, improbable, if nobody even knew yet they were under attack. Her heart pounded, but her mind remained frighteningly clear. If someone didn't change the geometry of this fight, this place would become a crater full of bodies and smashed electronics. And the people she cared about would be names on a list. She spotted a young private wrestling a rifle case out of the back of a truck near a maintenance bay, panic making his movements clumsy. "Hey!" Raya shouted, sprinting toward him as a burst of gunfire chewed up the ground behind her. "You, with a rifle." He spun, eyes wide, finger too close to the trigger. "Ma'am, you can't be out here, you have to." "Is that a designated marksman rifle?" She cut in, already reaching for the case. "Yes, but it's for whoever can actually use it," she said, snapping the latches. Inside lay a long, heavy-barreled rifle with an optic perched on top, like a squinting eye. The glass was cracked at the edge from some earlier impact, but the reticle looked mostly intact. She lifted it with a familiarity that made the private's protest die in his throat. "Who are you?" he managed. "Just visiting," she said, "which means I'm expendable if this goes sideways." "Where are your towers?" He pointed toward the perimeter. "There and there, but Tower 2 says they can't see the ridge. There's too much dust." "Then I'll find a different angle," she said. On a nearby radio, Kincaid's voice broke through in ragged bursts, fighting the jammer. "QRF, maybe get a signal. Keep LZ clear." Raya slung the rifle, tightened the loaned armor around her chest, and took a breath. Staying inside the wire meant staying in the bowl. Staying in the bowl meant living at the mercy of that overhead gun and those mortars. There was only one way to break the geometry. She would have to climb. She glanced toward the rear of the base, toward the gap she'd seen earlier from the catwalk. A maintenance bay whose wall had taken a near miss, a section of wire behind it crumpled outward, more decoration than barrier now. Her boots turned toward it before the rest of her had fully caught up. A fresh volley of machine gun fire raked the yard as she moved, rounds snapping past overhead, biting chunks out of the corner of a shipping container she ducked behind. Gravel stung her legs. She timed her dash across the next stretch to the rhythm of the bursts. 1, 2, 3, 4, pause, 1, 2, 3. She went on the pause, body low, feeling dust kick up in a wave behind her. Someone shouted something, maybe her name. She kept going. The maintenance bay stank of oil and hot metal. A workbench had been overturned by the initial blasts, tools scattered across the floor. A gaping hole in the far wall led to daylight and open air beyond. She slipped through it into the shallow drainage ditch that ran along the outer edge of the base. The ditch offered inches of cover, no more, but inches were better than nothing. Out here, the sound of the battle changed. The echo off the walls was gone, replaced by the flatter, more distant crack of weapons. The ridge loomed larger, more immediate. The sky above it was streaked with smoke. She slid along the ditch until its cover ran out, then hugged herself behind a low mound of dirt, feeling how exposed the slope beyond really was. The ground was loose scree and thorny bushes, with occasional rocks big enough to matter. If someone up there was looking, she would stand out. If they weren't, if their focus was entirely on the base, they might not notice one more piece of moving shadow on the slope. Smoke from the burning fuel bladder was beginning to drift this way now, a gray-brown tide rolling uphill. It would help mask her movements. It would also sting her eyes and make her optic that much less reliable. She started up, belly low, one knee at a time, rifle hugged tight against her. She felt the rocks under her palms, the prickle of thorns against her sleeves. Her muscles remembered the rhythm from another life. Crawl, pause, listen, move. Halfway up, a new sound joined the others, a faint, insistent hum from above. A small drone drifted overhead, its rotors whining softly, a camera orb scanning. Raya pressed herself into the shadow of a boulder, willing herself flat. Still, the drone passed, pausing once, lens angling down, then moved on, drawn back toward the more obvious chaos of the base. She waited 3 breaths longer than she wanted to before moving again. The outcrop she'd picked from the catwalk looked different up close, narrower, sharper, the drop on its far side steeper than she'd realized. It offered overlapping views of the motor pool, main gate, and the hill with the jammer truck. It also offered almost no cover from anything looking back this way. She crawled onto it anyway, easing herself flat on the warm stone, feeling the drop-off at her elbows, the rifle stock snug against her shoulder. From up here, the base looked small, vulnerable. The smoke rising from the burning vehicle at the gate made the compound look like a toy set on fire by a careless child. She peered through the optic. The crack made the image slightly distorted at the edge, but the center was clear enough. She dialed the magnification back, preferring a wider field of view over a tighter, riskier one. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. They remembered this. The part of her that had tried to be just a sister, just a visitor, took a step back and let the other part move forward. Through gaps in the smoke, she saw Tom again. He was still in the motor pool, still half-sprawled over his wounded friend, shoulders tight, firing blind bursts at flashes in the haze. His posture screamed one simple fact. Tom was almost gone. Raya let her breath out slowly, feeling the familiar narrowing of the world, the way all the noise softened into something she could work around. She was outside the wire now, outside the chain of command, outside any plan this base had ever briefed. Nobody had authorized this. Nobody would take responsibility if it went wrong. If she did nothing, scores of people would die. If she did something, at least she would go down doing what she understood. She settled her cheek against the stock, centered the reticle on the hillside above the mortar landing arcs, looking for the pattern behind the blasts. The first shot had to count. It always did.